Hello, my name is Yong-En Chi and I'm a Senior Research Fellow at the University of Melbourne. I'm going to try and give a brief overview of Project A2, which is about monitoring and evaluation for reporting, as well as for understanding intervention effectiveness and improvement. This project is really focused on supporting healthy waterways strategy implementation. And to do this, the project has played an advisory and critical review role in the monitoring, evaluation, reporting and improvement framework. It has also contributed to the monitoring and evaluation plans for rivers, wetlands, and estuaries. So Melbourne Water is really interested in a range of critical conditions that have a direct bearing on the health, functions, and values of waterways. And these include things like vegetation cover and quality, urban development and impervious cover, and in-stream barriers. An important management challenge is how to effectively and efficiently track these critical conditions across more than 20,000 kilometers of streams and an area that's nearly 13,000 square kilometers in size. Another management challenge relates to interventions. Interventions are decisions. There are interventions where there's high investment by Melbourne Water and stakeholders, but uncertainty or low confidence in the effectiveness or consistency of achieving the desired outcomes. So the challenge here is to identify critical assumptions between key interventions, their relationships with environmental contexts and conditions, and how these interactions influence the values and outcomes of interest. So coming back to the first key question, how do we effectively and efficiently track changes in critical conditions of interest? So two examples of these critical conditions of interest are riparian vegetation and impervious cover. Now, vegetation is important in and of itself, but the vegetation and impervious cover are also of great interest because they're really important drivers in our habitat suitability models for in-stream animals such as macroinvertebrates, fish, and platypus. Vegetation cover and quality is generally a positive driver, and impervious cover that generates a lot of stormwater runoff is a negative driver. So this image shows the areas of expected future urban growth in Greater Melbourne in orange, but the urban growth will occur at different rates in different locations, and we don't know exactly how it will unfold on ground. Tracking changes in critical conditions like vegetation cover and impervious cover like this will require the development of specific methods for estimation. Now, turning to interventions, as I said, interventions are decisions. How do we design studies that target what we need to learn about in order to update our theories of change and feed this back into more effective decisions? This figure shows the adaptive management cycle that can guide the process. And models are really important in this adaptive management cycle because they help us to formalize and communicate how we think the system works. They enable us to identify what are the critical assumptions between key interventions and environmental contexts and conditions. What are the causal and mediating influences on desired outcomes of interest? So for example, Melbourne Water does a great deal of revegetation, but it doesn't always result in the successful establishment of vegetation structure and communities that support habitat and ecosystem functions. So this particular problem is the focus of sub-project A2 on riparian revegetation. Another example is environmental watering of billabongs. Given the ways in which river regulation and surrounding land use has been dramatically changed, how can environmental water be best managed to achieve ecological, indigenous cultural, and social values at the lower Yarra billabongs. This particular problem is the focus of subproject A2 on billabong watering. Critical assumptions of Melbourne water interventions are examined in a range of research practice partnership projects, including A1, A2 riparian revegetation, A2 billabong watering, and the C1 Sunbury project on integrated water management. Now, each one of these projects has its own update presentations, so I just wanted to highlight this link, but I won't elaborate on them here. Now, the last research question I'm going to talk about is a once-off study on water quality processes along the Yarra for the coming year. 20 years ago, there was an intensive water quality sampling exercise along the Yarra River and its tributaries. In the coming year, we're going to repeat this water quality sampling effort so that we have an augmented data set, and we'll use this to understand what impacts increasing urbanization, but also changes and improvements in wastewater practices have had on nutrient loads and in-stream retention rates along the Yarra River. So a longitudinal study, if you like. So the research benefits of this project for Melbourne Water are understanding the applicability and performance of remote sensing methods for landscape scale monitoring and prediction of riparian vegetation condition, efficiencies in monitoring, detecting anomalies, and reporting riparian vegetation condition across Melbourne's waterways, clear articulation and understanding of accuracy of impervious estimates required for a range of healthy waterway strategy applications, agreed methods for producing these impervious estimates and a good understanding of the relevant limitations, understanding of how urban growth and sewage treatment plant management changes over the last 20 years have altered water quality patterns and processes in the Yarra River. And finally, data to improve or validate aspects of Melbourne Water's source model. So methods for tracking critical conditions depends on the attribute of interest, as I was saying before. For vegetation quality, we are collaborating on a Melbourne Water and RMIT research project using time series spectral data from satellites. Melbourne Water have already got field and desktop assessed vegetation quality at approximately half of Melbourne's waterways, but no data for the rest. So that's a considerable length of streams that don't have data. So the project has explored the use of existing data to identify useful Landsat-derived indices for distinguishing between vegetation quality classes, for monitoring vegetation condition trends over time, and for developing statistical models to predict vegetation quality at unassessed locations. So the early indications are that the higher quality vegetation visions classes of 4 and 5 are actually quite distinguishable from the lower quality classes 1 to 3. And you can see that in some of these graphs. These graphs show the indices for the 5 major catchments across the Melbourne Water region. As you can see, 4s and 5s very distinctly separated from the 1s to 3s. And trend analyses were quite promising for identifying disturbance events and highlighting potential problem areas for further investigation on ground. So for example, this map shows the number of disturbance events over a 30-year period as detected through analysis of the spectral data from the Landsat models, from the Landsat satellite. Predictive models for vegetation quality also had potential, but there was also room for improvement in terms of accuracy. And that's what we'll like to work on later this year. For impervious cover, methods include formalizing the level of accuracy required for healthy waterway strategy and other purposes, agreement on the approach, the input data sets, and the methods that will permit consistent estimates over time. And then trialing the performance of these methods and getting stakeholder agreement on the set of methods to be rolled out. And for the Yarra water quality processes study, we'll conduct an intensive sampling campaign in late summer or autumn, using very similar methods used in the 1998 study, and collecting water quality samples from somewhere between 40 to 46 main stem sites and somewhere between 19 and 24 tributary sites. So some of the outcomes of this project so far have been, our contributions to the MERI science panel, contributions to and critical review of aspects of the rivers, wetlands, and estuaries monitoring and evaluation plans, some critical review of vegetation field monitoring and analysis methods for condition assessment and climate change response. So this is, in addition, this is a field program that sort of complements the remote sensing work, and sufficiently promising results from the Landsat time series vegetation assessment to warrant extension of the Melbourne Water RMIT research program. So for the coming year, we will continue to support improvement of the MERI framework in the rivers, wetlands, and estuary MEPs. We will support MERI, Melbourne Water Board risk, annual and other healthy waterway strategy related reporting requirements. We'll contribute to the Melbourne Water RMIT research project on improving predictive models of vegetation quality. And we'll also, this project will also be exploring the value of using Sentinel time series spectral data. So Sentinel is a different satellite, and it has the advantage of having more sensors, as well as 3 times better spatial resolution than Landsat. Sentinel pixels are 10 meters rather than 30 meters for Landsat. And so that could be really helpful for riparian revegetation, which can occur in really narrow bands. But the drawback with Sentinel is that it only goes back, the data only goes back to 2016, whereas for Landsat, we have data going all the way back to 1986. We will continue to develop the approach and agreed methods for producing consistent impervious estimates at time points of interest. And we'll undertake the Yarra River Water Quality Blitz for testing assumptions of water quality processes. And this will be done in partnership with our colleagues from Monash University. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge all the team members on Project A2, all of whom have contributed to making this project what it is. And thank you all for listening.